Hello, everyone. Welcome to the pod.
Welcome,
Welcome.
one and all.
All right, Corey.
Uh-oh.
I just thought of this. Crutches or wheelchair?
Dude, wheelchair. I freaking hate crutches.
That's so funny. We'll fill them in. What happened?
Okay, well, you want the full story or well, I guess I'll give you the short story.
Condensed.
Yeah, condensed. Well, the really short version is that I sprained my ankle really bad. The little longer version is that last Wednesday night, I was playing basketball. Usually play basketball on Wednesday nights. And I was at the very end of the night, and I jumped up. So the guy I was guarding kind of was driving on me. I jumped up to block him. And then when I came back down, he was kind of like still like in that spot. Like he hadn't like kept running or like moved on. And so when I was looking down to where I was going to land, because I didn't block him, unfortunately, then I was trying to avoid his feet because I saw them like kind of under me. But then like when we were shuffling around, I landed on his foot, but I was kind of like jumping forward. And so when I landed on his foot, my ankle like hyperextended forward. And then because of that, like my knee kind of buckled. And then my right ankle tried to support myself, but I ended up rolling it. And then I twisted my knee like on its side because I was trying to like, because then I was just all twisted up and stuff. And so then I like rolled onto the ground. I was screaming, holding both my ankles. I thought for sure they were both broken or something. I was like, what are the odds that both of my ankles break on the same night? So needless to say, the game was over. They brought me a bunch of ice. I elevated the ankle. My right one ended up being fine. My knee was a little bit sore, but the left one just started swelling up like a balloon. So I drove myself home. But then when I got home, I told Monique, I showed her, we took my sock off, and then saw that like it was already starting to turn colors, and there was like these two giant like bubbles on my ankle. Like one was like right where the joint is on the front, and the other one was like off to the side, but not on the ankle itself, because it wasn't like an ankle roll. It was just like a hyperextension almost. And she was like, yeah, it's broken for sure. And she was like, okay, well, do you want to make an appointment, or do you want to go to the ER? And I was like, well, I don't really want to go to the ER, and so why don't we go tomorrow? But then like 15 minutes passed, and just like taking off the sock and like just having it out, and I think like all their adrenaline finally like kind of like drained down a little bit, and it just started throbbing, and I was like, I couldn't handle it anymore. I was like on the verge of tears, which I almost never am, but it just hurt so bad. So I went to the ER, got the x-rays. So long story short, at like 3 a.m. they came back and they said that it wasn't broken. It was just a really severe sprain, and that I'd probably have to be off of it for a couple of weeks. And so they gave me crutches, and now I'm a cripple.
Man.
Oh, but okay, wait. The best part of the story, which I totally forgot, I totally skipped over, was so I managed to drive home, but then Monique met me down there. And of course, that night it's raining. It's like pouring. Like the one night in San Diego where it's just absolutely just crazy downfall. So she gets me up the stairs to our apartment, because we're up like 2 flights of stairs basically. But then when we needed to get back down to the car to go to the ER, she had to pull our car around to the back where the alley is, because it's a little bit shorter, and there's only a couple stairs you have to go up and down. But I could not walk at all. Like literally, like I couldn't move it, but also just like there was no way I could even like hop, because just like shaking it around would hurt a lot. So we had to get my office chair and like plant me on the office chair, get me onto it, and then roll me down to the end of the hallway, and then like basically like hop down the stairs, back onto the chair, up the hill to the other set of stairs, up those couple stairs, and then into the car. And the whole time it was pouring. Like we were
like
soaked.
A funny moment between you guys? Or were you
Oh
just, like,
yeah,
pissed?
we were like, this is the most ridiculous thing ever. Like, what are the odds that I sprained my ankle and it's pouring that same night?
That's funny.
Yeah, but good times, dude. I hate it.
Yeah.
I feel like there's some people who, kind of, they kind of secretly like the attention, and they're like, oh no, poor me. I'm like, I don't even want to be seen.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to do anything. I hate it. I just hate my life miserable. I didn't go to church on Sunday because I was like, I knew people were just going to ask me about it. And I'm super ready for it to be done.
Yeah, dude, I'm sorry that you have to postpone those hoop dreams, you know?
I know, bro.
sad.
I was nice that night too. It was like one of my better nights.
You're cooking.
I was cooking. But yeah, to answer your question, wheelchair for sure. It's way easier.
I honestly wasn't playing that. I just like thought of it. Oh yeah, that's a question.
That's a good one.
Boom. It's great.
Awesome, man.
Corey. All right. Well, why don't you transition us?
Yeah, there's really no way to segue here,
Make it
but
smooth.
we wanted to continue our little trickled series here on the Ten Commandments and other of the major commandments that God gives. So today, in this podcast, we're going to be talking about the second commandment. And this one was actually, okay, so we were talking
True
a little
or
bit
false?
before. What?
Is the second commandment different from the first commandment?
Yes.
No, true or false, Corey.
Oh, that's not an option.
I'll rephrase it.
Wait.
The second commandment is different from the first commandment.
True.
True. Okay.
Yeah.
Just making sure.
Okay.
For all those that are in the gray, just want to clear it up
Okay,
a
yeah,
little bit.
it's very different, in kind of subtle ways, but that's why I think it's so interesting to talk about. We'll talk about some of those nuances here, but like we talked about with the first commandment, I think, but especially with the second commandment, there's a lot more behind the scenes, and there's a lot more between the lines, and there's a lot more applications that you wouldn't really think about unless you kind of really dove into it. So that's what I want to get into. So maybe I can just start us out with reading the verse,
Yes.
and we can take it from there. So Exodus 20 verses 4 says, "You shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven above, or on earth beneath, or in water under the earth." And so the main part there would being, you shall not make for yourself an idol or a false image of God. And so it's interesting here, like you said, the first and second commandment seem similar. So what's your perception of like what it is and what it means?
In like the reading that I've done and like the commentary that I kind of looked into, the main the first thing that I found like as a common thread among everything that I read was everyone mentioned that they are closely like linked together, the first and second commandment. They are similar. I feel like you hold on a second, Max is being crazy. Max, just chill. Sorry, he's like biting my ankle.
Okay. Maximus, dude, come on.
He bites hard, dude.
I bet.
Super hard. Hey, gosh. This is what happens when I don't play with him all day, You're just cooped up in the office. Okay, so the common thread is that they are pretty closely linked. The main, or I think the biggest, when I read this point, it kind of made more sense to me. Basically, it said, this one that I read talked about that this commandment specifically addressing like having an idol of God in like in the physical form.
Okay.
Like that being something that God is like definitely not cool with. He's not down with that. Talked a lot about like the idea of like, what if we could really know exactly who God is and know his all of his ins and outs and his exact traits. And it talked about like, we see all these different pictures of who God is. We see him being really gentle. We see him being, dealing with us kindly. We see his wrath. We see his anger. We see his jealousy. So it kind of talked about like God is intricate. He is unique, and there's a lot of layers to him. And the reality is, we couldn't create like an idol or an image or some kind of physical object that clearly and distinctively like described who he was. And that's one of the reasons why he has this commandment of you will have no idols of me. And so that was when I read that commentary, that probably sums up I guess my thinking of it right now before we talk about it. So
yeah, and I think that's the most common I guess like the first thing that comes to mind is like the physical application there, where it's like you shall not make an idol or like something that represents God, that you would worship just like it would be God. But there's also the spiritual idol of God, or I guess like the spiritual image or basically representation of God that we have. And I thought it was interesting. So a lot of this is from one of Mark's messages at Foothills called the Church of the Mountain, I think it was called, the Church on the Mountain versus the Church in the Valley. And so he talks about, super interesting, because he talks about how, the context of when the Ten Commandments were given is, they're in the desert, basically. They're kind of like, things are a little bit like chaotic, like they don't really know, they don't have any rules yet. Like, again, going back to our previous episode on the Ten Commandments, like literally there was nothing to go off of, like, here's why you shouldn't or should not do this. Here are the rules to live by, right? And so Moses goes up on the mountain for 40 days to receive these instructions and 10 commandments from God. And he's learning, like on the 40, it doesn't take God 40 days to give or like create the 10 commandments for Moses. The rest of that time is spent like talking and explaining and teaching Moses how these apply in real life. In the meantime, very ironically, the Israelites down below in the valley are basically breaking all the 10 commandments. And one of the first things that they do is they come and they grumble to Aaron and they say, hey, Moses has abandoned us. Why don't we make for ourselves an idol of God for us to worship? And Aaron, being kind of like the passive, kind of submissive person that he is like, okay, well, everyone give me your earrings, and then I'm going to melt it down, and then we'll make a golden calf for us to worship. But what's interesting is that what they say is, let us make an idol so that we can worship the Lord or worship God. So it wasn't that they were worshiping a different God. It was that they were worshiping this image of God.
It was that they needed an image.
Exactly. So the first commandment says, you shall not have any other gods. The second commandment is that you shall not have any false images of me, of God, because there are right and wrong ways to view and to worship God, which makes it really interesting. Because he says specifically, like, if you look in the text, I think the original, basically, like the meaning is, let us make an image so that we can worship Yahweh. Like it's very specifically pointed at God. Like there's no gray line of like who were they trying to worship. They were trying to worship God, but they are worshiping their own version of God, which is a big kind of misconception there. And so basically, like the road that I wanted to take it down, and maybe kind of the more practical takeaways here, were basically taking that whole concept of how are we, like, what are the false images that we have of God, and basically, like, what's the difference, like, of worshiping God and worshiping our own version of God? Because one of the things that Mark says, right, is that like a false image of God, or basically like a spiritual idol of God, is simply a subjective but untrue view of who God is. And he gives examples of, like, how people say, well, my God would never do or say that, or I feel like God wouldn't care about, me doing this little thing over here or breaking this one thing, or I don't believe that God X or would X or does X. Like, I don't believe that God sends people to hell, or I don't believe that God hates these certain people, or my God wouldn't say that, X, Y, and Z. Basically, we create our own interpretation of who God is, and that's our own version of God. Which is, and now it makes sense of, like, that's a really big deal, right? If you're just changing who God is and making a false version of who God is in your mind.
Yeah, I think hearing it from the perspective of, like, those sayings of my God wouldn't say that, my God wouldn't do, blank or X. It's funny because I guess that doesn't matter. Like, great that you think that, but, like, what does the Bible actually say who God is? And as you're talking about it, I was kind of thinking, like, yeah, like, I think we're actively doing this. People are like, for sure, like, this is like super common thing of our image, our picture of God. And again, as you were speaking, I was kind of thinking to myself, like, I had this image of God in my head, and we all have, like, this picture. Side note: when I was younger, I don't know why, I always pictured God as the McDonald's guy. Isn't that funny?
No way.
I have no idea why. From, like, a young age, dude. Like, and this stopped when I got older. But,
that's so amazing.
Every time I pictured him, it was like, the red afro.
So a clown.
Essentially, yeah.
Oh my, that's so scary.
Isn't that funny? I have no idea why. That was
now
my
just
image
picture
of
Pennywise from It.
That movie, I thought movie was land, dude. I fell asleep.
I didn't watch it.
Anyway, so I guess my point I was trying to make was, I guess it doesn't matter. Like, in here, like, we're talking about, like, what does the Bible say? What does the Bible say? How should God be viewed? What is the perception that God has in the Bible? That's what matters. It doesn't matter what we can make up, because it's subjective, like Mark said. Like, it doesn't hold any weight or ground.
Yeah, one of the big things that he stressed about was how the second commandment is a good reminder that we need to trust and rely on the Bible to tell us who God is, not our own subjective experiences or opinions or interpretations, basically, because there's all sorts of different ways that we can skew what someone says, the meaning of a verse, or like take a verse out of context, or we can just completely ignore it altogether. But like if you really want to know who God is and have a good image of it, like just read, like just take the Bible and like this is who God is. There is no room for to the left or to the right of who God could be. It's basically just saying like this is who God is. And the line that I really love that he says is, he says, a person's lifestyle always reflects their image of God. Because if their image of God is that he's lenient and then he doesn't care about X, Y, and Z, or that that there's always grace and forgiveness, or that God doesn't care if they do X, Y, and Z, or that God acts in certain ways, like he doesn't send people to hell, or that he is okay with this certain genre of sin or lifestyle or people group, then that's the way you're going to live, right? I mean, those are like, it basically changes the rules for you. But if your image of God is correct, right, if you have a very biblical view of God, then that's going to also change the way that you live and the way that you see God. And he breaks it down. He says, there's a church in the mountain, and these are people who rely on who God says he is in the Bible and see his commandments as true guidelines for life. And then we have the church in the valley who rely on their own subjective experiences and convenient opinions and see his commandments as suggestions. Basically, it's kind of like buffet style Christianity, where you just like pick and choose what you like, and then you just ignore the rest and keep it or leave it for someone else to deal with.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. At the buffet, I'm one of those guys that gets like 2 or 3 plates to start out with.
You go to like the Asian section and the Mexican section, and to the American section.
Start with the Mexican section every single time. Beans
Really?
and rice, the salt. Oh yeah, dude. Chips. It's like an appetizer. Got to get started, then make your way into the main courses.
See, my only thing with buffets is that why would you go to a buffet?
You are crazy.
To get food that you could get elsewhere, who like specifically makes that food.
Because you get so much of it, unlimited quantities.
Okay.
You don't know this about me, but I cannot anymore. I used to be big time on buffets.
Hometown buffet?
That was where I went for my 6th grade birthday.
Wow, I'm learning so much today. You used to see God as a clown, the McDonald's man.
Yes, sir.
Buffets apparently are a big part of who you are and what you love.
Correct.
Very interesting stuff.
Get ready for what's next.
Oh, no.
No, I'm just kidding.
Dang it. It's like, what could be better than that?
That's funny. I had a thought I wanted to say, but I'm sorry for making us go off track.
No worries.
I'm sorry for having personality and spunk,
That's
trying to keep it spicy.
Hey, what are you trying to say?
That you're pretty much to the script. Shoot. We'll talk, Corey, because I'll remember. Okay,
well, I'm going to go back to the script. So, anyways, I think the whole thing that's super interesting to me is basically like, what does this commandment mean and what should we do with it? So he says, you shall not make for yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in heaven. I think for the most part, we can follow this commandment to the T as far as like the physical representations of God, the physical idols, like we're not going to fashion for ourselves a golden calf, or any sort of shrine or, I don't know, like thing hanging up in your house, right? I think that's relatively easy to follow. Like you just don't do it or don't go to the work of creating one or buying one. The spiritual aspect though, I think that it's a really good reminder of like, we constantly need to be pulling our attention back into who is God and who does he say that he is, and not who do I think he is and who do I want him to be.
Okay, that's the part I wanted to comment on, because I think the first part about like the boundaries of not having like a physical image idol of God, like that's pretty cut and dry, easy, like either you do or you don't do that. But I think the other part about like what is your image, what is your understanding, what is your perception of God, like that's obviously more like blurred. Like if you find yourself in that place of having like this misconstrued idea of who he is, like how do you go about correcting that? Because the Bible is filled with one of the things that I read was simply, I don't have the quote written down, but it talked about basically like simply like look at the Bible to learn and educate yourself on who God is. But I guess if you're someone that maybe you're unfamiliar with the Bible, you don't know a lot about it. Like there's a lot to read. There's a lot to really study to understand who like is this God, who is God, what makes him, what is his character. So how do you, if you're on that side, how do you where's your check and balance? Like how do you figure this out?
Yeah, I mean, like we said before, I think that the Bible is like the ultimate source. And so you can explore that yourself, and you can read through, and like if you haven't read through the Bible, do it. Like take notes. You can even go through some sort of study guide or plan or devotional. But then also, I mean, that's the reason why we have pastors and teachers who can show us things or reveal to us things that we maybe don't catch in the Bible, or that can kind of bring more truth and application out of what we've read, and give us new perspectives. And then there's, friends and people that we commune with, and there's people who hopefully should kind of like keep us in line of, hey, like maybe that's not the most accurate view of who God is, or maybe, have you considered this other perspective or this other truth or this other verse maybe that contradicts what you think or believe. But I mean, it's not really like an easy thing to correct. Like there's so many, I mean, I'm sure that we could probably find something of like, oh yeah, maybe my view isn't like completely accurate here. It's like you're never, it's hard to just like go from 0 to 1 of like, all right, I have a perfect image of who God is and like believe everything is true. Like some things take a little bit more time, or just need more time to be revealed to you, for you to know it. Yeah,
I was gonna say, it's like a process of just learning, and I think it's like a lifelong kind of, just as you grow more and know God more, like you learn more about him. Simple as that,
Yeah. What book is really good though is Mere Christianity. I feel like I wrote it off for years because it just sounded like
I read it.
A cliche. You haven't read it? Oh, dude, it's
on my list.
He's such an amazing writer. It's really short.
Is it?
Yeah, you could probably read it in a day if you really wanted to. It'd take a few hours, but man, every chapter is like this new truth of like who God is and what Christianity really is about. And he breaks it down so simply. It's like poetry, basically. It's like super beautifully written.
Okay. Any more thoughts that you wanted to hit on this one?
I don't think so. I think it's a good reminder. Maybe like the one thing that I would probably just like leave us on to think about is just that quote from Mark Hoffman: "A person's lifestyle always reflects their image of God." And just think about your own lifestyle, and think about others' lifestyles, the choices that they make, the way that they live their life. And it, Jesus said, you will know them by their fruits, right? And basically you will know them by what they show you and what they produce, and the things that they manifest in their life. And it's always a good indicator of someone's views and their beliefs. So like, look at your own life and like, is your image of God correct? Or are there things you need to work on? And, trace them back to the root. Like, do I believe that God is good? Do I believe that God is loving? Do I believe that God forgives? There are all sorts of these things maybe that are kind of like wandering around in our minds that maybe haven't gone dealt with, that you can kind of, with this maybe motivation, go and explore and go and get maybe some more truth revealed about. Yeah,
one point that I wanted to leave off on was we touched a lot about like just like the vastness of God, and like that it could be hard to kind of sum it up. Who is this God? But Mark, he's given a message about sorry, Max is going bonkers right now. Gosh,
Max is taking over. He's like, let me on. Put me in, coach.
It's so hard to focus when he's like jumping on you and biting you. It's like, okay. But he talks about the fear of God and like letting that kind of be like, when you think of God, like remember, like God, he is a God to be feared. And I was just thinking about like that should be the image of God. I think that we really center like our image of God on, and we remember him, and remember that we should fear him and respect him, because fearing God ultimately means that we respect him and we hold him in like high reverence, and that we I don't use the word are afraid, but we're very mindful of consequences to our actions, and that he isn't mocked, and he doesn't waver, he doesn't change. Who God is who he is, and then we are the ones that we work and move around that and who he is. So
right. Yeah. I mean, and it sort of is a scary thing a little bit of like, oh, like, do I like have a good view and like image of who God is. Like, if not, it's kind of scary of like, hey, like you're not worshiping the right God, or like you don't know God the same way maybe that you should.
Yeah.
Or like,
I remember I think it's like in like 6th grade, Caleb Hoffman gave, so in our junior high group, when you were a part of like the leadership corps or whatever, they would make you like at one point give your first message.
Yeah.
And so Caleb's first message, I'm pretty sure, was about like the fear in the Lord. And it was based off like a message his dad had recently done at the church. And I remember I didn't know like what that meant and how that looked like. I remember Caleb asking like what does it mean to fear God? And I remember thinking like, I'm scared of God. And Caleb just like broke it down and said like it really at the core means to respect him, and all that you do is like based off of that. And that's like really stuck with me. And just like I feel like whenever the topic of fearing the Lord comes up, it's like, yeah, like I need to be reminded of that. Just this morning I was reading my Bible in Joshua, and it was one of them was talking about like fearing God. And I actually had this little note that I written a couple years ago, some note basically about like remember this, like keep this in the front of your mind, like fear God. I think at the end of the day, like if that's your ultimate view of him, and if you fear him and you respect him and hold him in high reverence, I think that's gonna keep you in high waters and keep you, or should I say high waters is the opposite, but it's gonna keep you on the
clear
right track,
waters.
clear waters, in the right track, and out of trouble, and so
it's good. Love it. Well, I don't know about you, but I feel like I have a really solid understanding of the second commandment now. Do you?
I'm gonna give myself a solid B+ in this situation.
B+, okay.
Yeah.
Good grade for yourself. It's not too bad.
Easy.
A good
Easy,
89.9%. You know,
take it easy. All right, crutch boy. Okay.
Well,
got him, dude.
Once again, thank you for listening. If you like this episode, please share it with a friend. We'd love to hear your thoughts about your perception of the second commandment, and maybe other thoughts you've had about the 10 commandments, and how you live your life, how you see God and view God, and see Him in that light. Don't forget about our 3 projects we have going on slowly but surely here. But we've got our cultivateandkeep.com/merch for our t-shirts, hats on the way. Hoodies, other things on the way. We've got cultivateandkeep.com/journal for a 52-week-long devotional journal. And then cultivateandkeep.com/community for a private community with people like you, for you to be able to share your thoughts and experiences with. All right? And we will see you in the next one.